My guess is late 2012, maybe even first quarter 2013, they will then come out with a final rule. And now this is what they say: we've looked at your comments, we've evaluated them, we've considered them, we've made adjustments where we thought that was appropriate. Here's now what we're going to do. And it will come out in the Federal Register as a final rule, and they typically then have a time period by which you'll be able to prepare for implementation. And let's just say it's 6 months, that from the time the final rule is published in the Federal Register, 6 months later will be the actual date when the regulation goes into effect, and we're actually now obligated to comply with the regulation. So we're talking mid to late 2013 before you'll probably have a regulation on the books that you as an operator will be required to comply with. Now let's talk a little bit about the rule itself. In the ARC process, there was a clear understanding that there's a difference between recreational operations and commercial and public use operations. That's been traditional in FAA aviation regulations in the past. There always has been a little bit of leniency, if you will, or a different approach for recreational operations than there is for those people that are out there flying commercially and perhaps creating a little different risk in terms of the people that they are operating on behalf. Such as the most obvious one is when you board an aircraft, a commercial carrier, to go on a flight, you obviously are putting your life in their hands, and there's a greater duty of responsibility on that carrier operator to make sure you remain safe, versus the private pilot that goes out there and flies and just exposes himself and maybe his family or guests that fly with him. So in the ARC process, they did slice off and put recreational operation on one side and commercial and public use operation on the other side. And there'll be in the rule, probably 90% of the rule is going to handle the public and commercial operators, but there will be another portion that will talk strictly about commercial recreational operation. And then within the recreational operation will be a set of criteria that says that here's how you have to operate your model aircraft in order to do it safely within the national airspace. We're told that that's going to be relatively restrictive compared to what we're used to today. And it's not intended to encompass or to capture all of the modeling activity that we understand and know. So what they did is create a provision within that part of the rule that says that organizations like AMA are provided an opportunity to create a set of standards, which is, by another words of saying rules, but a set of standards that if approved and adopted by the FAA, can be used as an alternative to comply with the rules. So if the standards are adopted and implemented, then as a modeler, you would basically have a choice. You can fly by the rule in that parameter of those criteria that the rule states, or you can choose to operate by the approved set of standards that may have more detail into it on how you do it safely, but if you do it safely, may allow you to do a little bit more. So that having been said, now the rule itself is what we're talking about in the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. They'll be coming out this spring. And the standards operation is what James and Lynn have been much more involved in, is an alternative set of guidelines or rules that the AMA is developing that will allow us to expand that box and do additional operations as long as we can show we can do it safely. And that's where we are today. We just finished a 2.5-day meeting with Lynn and James with our work group, which I introduced last year, and there's probably many of them in the room here. I know I saw Gary and a couple others. Those of you that are on the work group, you want to raise your hand? Or so we've got a lot of people, everybody from people on the council, we've got staff, we've got people within the AMA community that have special interest expertise from things from soaring, racing, large model aircraft, so on and so forth. And for the last 2.5 days, that work group has been meeting with the FAA and working on these standards. And that process is it's an interesting process. Well, we come from different perspectives, and we have different expectations, and we understand things differently. And in any environment like that, there's a lot of exchange and trying to come to a mutual understanding, and then moving from a mutual understanding to a mutual agreement. And it's not an easy process. We have certainly differed on issues, agreed to at least postpone discussion on issues where we, at that point, can't come to agreement on. But the process is moving forward, and it is moving in a positive fashion that I'm optimistic that we will have a set of standards that will enable 99.9, if not 100% of the modeling activities that we see today. So that brings us to right where we're at. And if I didn't bring anything out, then I'll turn it back to you, Bob.
I thank you, Rich. Lynn, would you like to give the FAA perspective as to what we have been doing as a group to work on the standards for aero modeling?
Absolutely. Since I became involved with the modeling standard, and I'm glad you pointed that out, that James and I are not involved with the rule part of the rulemaking process. We're involved in working the small piece that is the modeling standard that can be used as an alternative to the modeling path in the rule. So for the past 13 months or so that I've been involved, we have weekly meetings for about 3 hours, and we have met for several face-to-faces where we work for days at a time, locked in a room. And we've had the opportunity to see all kinds of modeling activities, from soaring to co-located operations at airports with manned aircraft, to all kinds of mixed-use facilities and really all kinds of neat stuff, gliders. And it's been a challenging environment at sometimes, but I think a very positive, important, energetic process that's been moving forward at a very steady pace and covering more and more ground every month that goes by, and I think progressing very well, not without bumps. I think, as Rich pointed out, there are times when we interpret things or see things differently, and we'll push, and the members from AMA, the leaders from AMA that work the effort, will push. And we're coming to some real, I think, great standards that capture how modeling aviation is performed safely today. And I think last year when I was here in this room, I spoke to the fact that one of the main effort that we were undertaking was to capture what does make modeling aviation safe. Because, as you all have pointed out and routinely point out, model aviation has been conducted for 75 years, very safely and with an excellent reputation. And so our effort was to capture, well, how is it that it is done safely? What is it that modelers do that create the safe operations that we see today? And so I think it's been a very, very fruitful and challenging effort as we try to capture all those facets. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or?
All right, before I allow James to have his piece, I would like to point out that we're going to pass out papers to those that wish to ask questions. When you write down your question, please make it legible. I'm a retired school teacher, and one of the statements that I've often made, if I can't read it, I can't do it. So please, there will be several people passing out paper for you. Write the questions down, we'll collect them, and we're going to put a time limit on this of until 3 o'clock. However, please, if you have a question and it's an intelligent question, put it down on paper. James, your turn.
Thanks. I'd just like to, I don't know if this is working, I'd just like to add a few points to what Lynn was speaking about. And just for broader introductions, Lynn actually did a great deal of work on the safety portion of looking at small UASs. So she's very familiar with how the bar will be applied to the standard that AMA has taken on to be considered as a means of complying with the rule that's going to come out eventually. So her background's pretty extensive. Mine, and as she said yesterday in the executive council meeting, her son's an RC pilot, and I saw her buying bags worth of stuff out at the vendors. So she's engaged in the hobby as well. I've flown model aircraft radio control since the early 70s, and I've been an AMA member probably since I think it was 74, 75. So I have a little bit of experience in flying, and I have I guess somehow a vested, if not conflicted, interest in making sure that this goes well. But to be clear, in the process, AMA's taken on behalf of, not to speak for you, Bob, or the others, but a really tremendous task of presenting to the FAA at the end of this effort reasonable methods by which model aviation can not only continue but flourish in the future. So some of the stuff that we've discussed in these meetings really has been about how you can operate your model aircraft safely, but not being overbearing in how you present that, so that it's usable, and as Lynn reminds them on a continuous basis, that it's the necessary and sufficient documentation, representation of how you do model aviation safely. And what we've found in this process is the majority of what we discuss is already in AMA guidance that exists. It's just repackaging, and in some areas maybe there's some things that as modelers we don't think of on a normal basis, and drafting that up and documenting it, capturing it, seems like a pretty good and reasonable thing to do. And at the end of the day, the assessment of the standard that you develop really has got to say, is it reasonable to believe that if each of you sitting here today were handed a sheet of paper with that standard or standards, is it reasonable to believe that you could go out and operate a model aircraft in whatever manner it is and do that safely? And that's the objective. It's really a safety objective. So I just wanted to add to that and say that I really believe that this is a tremendous task, and that AMA participation, leadership in that has been nothing short of extraordinary, and they're making really good progress. So I'll leave that to them to talk about the details, I guess. But it is your standard. It is not an FAA standard. So thank you for the opportunity.